London in itself was such a vital place in the early to mid-60s, and it was really quite an awakening for a country boy like me. And it changed the nature of my work entirely. And instead of looking at fields and hedges and so on, one started to look at mostly signs and symbols and things like the London Underground sign, that big red circle with the blue streak across the middle. And that started to occur, those kind of shapes started to occur in the paintings, which then graduated into these, what everyone now calls target shapes, which I never really intended them to be seen as targets. They were, in fact, to me, circles and squares, and it was a way of putting very bright colours next to each other. And people always seem to notice the circles, but not the squares for some reason.
What was it like actually producing them?
People, they see movies of Kirk Douglas's Van Gogh, in a frenzy. I mean, a great deal of the work of producing paintings is fairly tedious. And in this case, what I did was I painted on these small individual canvases, and it was simply a matter of sitting at a desk and painting them. And of course, then the exciting moment came when you assembled them, and being assemblages, it was possible to make variations, so that whilst you were assembling one, you could experiment with the shapes and canvases that you had, and maybe some ideas for the next one would arise, and so on. So that you have that moment of excitement when you have the initial sort of concept, and then you have this, perhaps in some cases, weeks of tedium whilst you actually produce the canvases, and then again the excitement of the finished thing.
And what kind of reception did some of these distinctive works get?
I think they were extremely well received, and I think that's borne out by the fact that they've ended up in extremely good collections all around the world. And they seem to be very much of their time, and consequently I used to actually earn quite a lot of money hiring paintings and prints out, and they were hired for films and television and adverts in magazines and so on. So they seem to kind of fulfill a need at that particular moment,
And American TV crews and people often come and talk to you about the phenomenon of the swinging 60s and so forth. From your own point of view, how important in what happened do you think it was the fact that boys, young women like yourself, were given chances that perhaps previous generations hadn't had?
I think that's absolutely true. I was interviewed for American television by someone who was slightly more perceptive than normal, and he rather shocked me by saying, of course, I've been around London. I've spoken to David Hockney and David Bailey and various people of your generation, and it seems to me that you're all basically working class kids who benefited from the two major changes in education, which I don't know the exact dates, but I think it was the 1945 Education Act, and then there was one a few years later, which enabled children from quite modest homes, first of all, to have secondary education, and then further education. And I think we were the first generation of those children who kind of hit the street, as it were, and became professional artists. And that was certainly true in my case, because I think my parents, I'm absolutely certain that my parents couldn't have afforded to have kept me on at art school and indefinitely. And it was only because the education was free that, by doing weekend jobs and so on, that I managed to stay there. And I think that applied to quite a lot of those people of my own generation.
And did that make you feel in a certain sort of way? I mean, did you have in your head just occasionally the idea that you were perhaps crusading for a purpose and producing work in a way that people hadn't before? How special did you feel?
I don't think at the time I felt anything like that at all. As I say, it wasn't until this American pointed it out to me that I realised that fact. But what one did feel was, you know, it was a tremendous period of excitement, and you had the same kind of thing happening in fashion and photography, and you felt that you were changing the face of Britain, the visual face of Britain anyway. It later transpired that it was all rather a myth, but, you know, it was a very superficial thing. But nevertheless, at the time, you felt that you were in a position to change the way people perceive things. Whether that's true in historical perspective or not, I'm not quite sure.
How would you like them to be seen now yourself?
They clearly have a period flavour to them, particularly these sort of later 60s works. But also, I think it's also quite interesting to see that there is a consistency right throughout the work, that there's never any deep perspective. I've never been particularly interested in using the illusion of perspective. They rely very much on a sort of heraldic imagery, very strong, bold shapes and very strong colours. And those sort of phenomena go right up to the present. I mean, the more recent work is perhaps slightly more subtle. I think there are certain shapes which are almost in your psyche, and you sort of take them from different sources at different times, but in actual fact the shapes, the images that appeal to you remain very consistent.